The dim lighting of the veterans' cantina cast long shadows across weathered faces as Zefkol settled into his usual corner booth. His forearms moved with practiced efficiency, one holding his drink while another adjusted the neural dampener that kept his war memories from overwhelming his consciousness. The other patrons gave him space. They all knew the look of someone who had seen too much. Tonight felt different, though. A young Altarian journalist sat across from him, recording device humming softly between them. She had been persistent, this one. Weeks of requests, promises of anonymity, appeals to his sense of duty to warn others. Finally, he had agreed to tell his story. Not the sanitized version in the military reports, but the truth. The truth about what happened when the Galactic Federation encountered a species called humans. "You want to know about the humans?" Zefkol said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades since the war ended. "Everyone does. They think it's just another war story, another tale of conquest and defeat. But humans—" He paused, taking a long drink. "Humans broke every rule we thought governed warfare, governed life itself." The journalist leaned forward eagerly. Her generation had grown up with stories of the human wars, but they were legends now, cautionary tales told to frighten unruly children. Few believed the accounts were real. "I was part of the 47th Strike Fleet," Zefkol continued. 3,000 ships, over 500,000 soldiers from 12 different species. We were the finest military force the Federation had ever assembled. Our weapons could crack planets, our shields could withstand stellar radiation. We had fought and conquered 47 different species across 600 worlds. He rotated his primary arms, joints clicking from old injuries. The humans had only just developed faster-than-light travel. Primitive chemical propulsion, basic energy weapons, no unified government. Intelligence suggested they were fractured into hundreds of competing nation-states, constantly fighting among themselves. They seemed like any other primitive species we had brought into the Federation. Some resistance was expected, but nothing we couldn't handle. The journalist's eyes widened as she began to understand this wasn't going to be a typical conquest story. "First contact was educational," Zefkol said with a bitter laugh. "We sent the standard ultimatum: surrender, accept Federation rule, and your species will be preserved and protected. Refuse and face the consequences. Most species chose wisely. Humans—" He shook his head, mandibles clicking in what might have been admiration or disgust. "They sent back a message. Just 2 words in their primary trade language. Come take it. That should have been our first warning." Zefkol's secondary arms began unconsciously tracing old scars on his carapace. Admiral Krekek decided to make an example. He chose what their intelligence identified as a moderately important military installation, someplace called Pearl Harbor on their 3rd continent. The plan was simple: demonstrate our superiority, destroy their primitive defenses, and accept their inevitable surrender. The cantina around them had grown quieter. Other veterans had begun listening, drawn by the familiar pain in Zefkol's voice. "We expected their ships to scatter, their soldiers to flee. Instead, they attacked us. Ships that had no business surviving our first salvo somehow stayed in the fight, ramming our vessels when their weapons failed. We destroyed 90% of their defending force in the first hour. But that last 10%... His voice trailed off as the memories flooded back. They kept fighting. Not just fighting, they were learning. Every engagement, they adapted faster than our computers could model. They studied our weapons, our tactics, our formations, and somehow found weaknesses we didn't know existed. The journalist interrupted softly. "But surely your superior technology means nothing if your enemy doesn't follow the rules," Zefkol snapped. "We expected orderly retreats when positions became untenable. Humans would fight to the last soldier, then rig their corpses with explosives. We expected them to protect their civilians. Instead, they turned every factory, every school, every medical facility into a weapons production center. He took another drink, this one longer than the last. But it was their children that broke us first. The recording device seemed to hum louder in the sudden silence. Human children, some barely old enough to walk, carrying explosive devices into our staging areas. We couldn't fire on them. Federation law, species preservation protocols, basic morality, but they had no such restrictions. They used our own rules against us. Zeph Cole's 4 eyes focused on something far beyond the cantina walls. I watched a human child, couldn't have been more than 10 cycles old, detonate herself and take out an entire command bunker. 15 officers, including a sector commander, gone in an instant. The look in her eyes before she triggered the device. He shuddered, causing his exoskeleton to rattle. No fear, no hesitation, just absolute determination. That's when I knew we weren't fighting a normal species. The journalist sat back, her eagerness replaced by growing horror. How could children? Because humans don't see war the way we do, Zeph Cole interrupted. For the Federation, war is politics by other means. Conquest, subjugation, resource acquisition. For humans, war is survival itself. They don't fight to win territory or resources. They fight to ensure their species continues to exist. He gestured with all 4 arms, a sign of emphasis his species reserved for the most important communications. Every human, from birth to death, is a potential soldier. Their females fight alongside their males. Their elderly provide intelligence and logistics. Their children serve as couriers and saboteurs. We were fighting not just an army, but an entire species. The cantina had grown completely silent now. Even the service staff had stopped their work to listen. Admiral Krikek ordered a full planetary siege. Standard procedure, blockade all space traffic, target infrastructure, wait for surrender. It had worked on dozens of worlds before, but humans? Zeph Cole laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Humans had prepared for this scenario for centuries. What do you mean? The journalist whispered. They called it total war. The concept of mobilizing every single resource, every single individual toward a single goal. While other species had developed this theory, humans had practiced it. They had fought wars among themselves that lasted generations, conflicts that consumed entire continents. Zeph Cole's voice grew quiet, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. We cut their supply lines, destroyed their orbital installations, bombed their major cities, and they kept fighting. Not just fighting, they were getting stronger. Every destroyed factory was replaced by 10 hidden workshops. Every fallen soldier inspired 100 new recruits. He stood up abruptly, his movements sharp and agitated. After 6 months of siege, their resistance had increased by 400%. Our intelligence couldn't explain it. Their military should have collapsed. Their economy should have been in ruins. Their population should have been demanding surrender. The journalist looked up at him. What were they doing differently? Zeph Cole sat back down heavily. They were learning from us. Every weapon we used against them, they reverse-engineered and improved. Every tactic we employed, they copied and perfected. But more than that, they were learning how to hurt us specifically. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of severe distress. Humans have something we had never encountered before. They call it spite. The ability to continue fighting not because victory is possible, but simply to cause maximum damage to their enemies. They would sacrifice entire cities just to destroy a single Federation outpost. The recording device captured every word as Zeph Cole continued. I remember the day we realized the humans had been studying us more carefully than we had been studying them. They had identified the psychological profiles of every major species in the Federation. They knew exactly how to break us. He pointed to a scar running across his secondary thorax. That's from a human projectile weapon, not energy-based like our weapons, but metal slugs propelled by chemical explosions. Primitive, we thought. until we realized they had designed the ammunition specifically to penetrate our exoskeletons and shatter inside our bodies. The journalist paled. They were targeting your biology? Everything they did was targeted, Zefkol confirmed. They studied our communication patterns and developed sonic weapons tuned to our hearing frequency. They analyzed our nutrition requirements and poisoned food supplies with compounds toxic to our species but harmless to theirs. They even weaponized their own diseases, releasing modified viruses that would jump from human to Federation species but cause minimal harm to themselves. The cantina erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Several veterans got up and left, unable to listen to more. But that wasn't the worst part, Zefkol continued, his voice barely audible now. The worst part was realizing that humans had been preparing for this war before they even knew we existed. The journalist stared at Zefkol as the weight of his last words settled over the cantina. What do you mean they were preparing before they knew you existed? Zefkol reached into his personal effects pouch and withdrew a small data crystal, its surface scarred from age and handling. Human military archives, he explained, captured during the siege of their capital systems. Would you like to know what we found? Without waiting for an answer, he activated the crystal. Holographic displays materialized above their table, showing technical diagrams and strategic documents in human script. For over 2,000 years, humans had been developing theoretical strategies for fighting technologically superior opponents. They called it asymmetric warfare. Long before they developed space travel, they were planning how to fight enemies with better weapons, better armor, better technology. The displays shifted, showing complex battle scenarios and theoretical weapon systems. Every human military academy taught courses on fighting impossible odds. Their entertainment media was filled with stories of small forces defeating vast armies through cunning and determination. They had turned the concept of being outmatched into an art form. Zefkol's voice grew hollow as he continued. We thought we were dealing with a primitive species. Instead, we had encountered a civilization that had spent millennia preparing for exactly our kind of war. They had fought among themselves for so long that warfare had become instinctual. The journalist studied the holographic displays, trying to understand the alien symbols and diagrams. These strategies, they're all focused on defeating superior forces. Exactly, Zefkol confirmed. Humans had developed hundreds of different methods for turning disadvantages into advantages. They could transform any terrain into a death trap, convert any civilian area into a fortress, make any retreat into an ambush. He manipulated the display, showing a three-dimensional battlefield map. This is the Kepler 442 system, where I first understood what we were truly fighting. The humans had retreated to a small mining colony on the system's fourth planet. Our scanners showed minimal defensive installations, maybe 10,000 human defenders against our force of 200,000. The map zoomed in, revealing the planet's surface in detail. The operation was supposed to be a simple mop-up action. Land troops, secure the mining facilities, process the human survivors. Standard procedure. Zefkol's four arms began moving independently, each gesturing to different parts of the holographic battlefield. Instead, we walked into the most sophisticated trap ever constructed. The humans had spent months preparing the planet as what they called a killing field. The display shifted to show underground tunnel networks spanning the entire colony. They had connected every building, every cave, every mining shaft into a single defensive network. We controlled the surface, but the humans controlled everything underneath. His voice took on the cadence of someone reliving a nightmare. Every step we took was monitored. Every position we established was bracketed by hidden weapons. They knew where we were at all times, but we could never find them until they chose to attack. The journalist leaned forward. How were they staying hidden? Human biology, Zefkol said with something like admiration. They had studied our sensors and learned to exploit their limitations. human body temperature, their electromagnetic signature, even their chemical composition, everything was just different enough from what our equipment was designed to detect. He highlighted specific areas on the map. Here, a full company of our troops was eliminated by 3 human soldiers using nothing but chemical explosives and carefully timed tunnel collapses. Here, our armored vehicles were disabled by humans who had somehow learned to jam our control systems with their primitive electronics. The displays showed engagement after engagement, each one demonstrating human tactical innovations. They had no energy shields, so they developed armor that absorbed and dispersed our weapon impacts. They had no orbital support, so they turned the planet itself into a weapon. Zefkol paused the display on an image of a massive crater. This was our primary staging area. We had landed our heaviest equipment here, established a command post, brought in supplies for a 6-month campaign. The humans waited until we had concentrated maximum assets in this location. The image zoomed out, revealing the crater was actually part of a much larger excavation. They had been mining this planet for decades, not for resources, for weapons. They had carved out the supporting structure beneath our entire staging area and filled the cavities with explosives. The journalist gasped. They collapsed the entire base? In less than 30 seconds, Zefkol confirmed. 40,000 Federation troops, hundreds of vehicles, 3 command ships that had landed for resupply, all gone. But that wasn't the worst part. He shifted the display to show the aftermath. They had positioned forces around the entire collapse zone. As our survivors tried to escape the crater, they were systematically eliminated. Not quickly, not cleanly. Humans wanted survivors to report what had happened. Zefkol's mandibles clicked in agitation. They were using our own communication protocols against us. Every distress call, every request for reinforcement was being monitored and used to position their next ambush. They turned our superior communications network into a targeting system. The journalist struggled to process what she was hearing. But surely your orbital forces could provide support. Humans had anticipated that too, Zefkol said grimly. They had studied our fleet engagement protocols and developed countermeasures. When our ships tried to provide orbital bombardment, the humans activated what they called human shields. The display showed a horrific tactical scenario. They had positioned their own civilian population in and around every military target, not as hostages, but as willing participants in their defensive strategy. Our rules of engagement prohibited firing on civilian targets, but humans were using their families as living armor. Zefkol's voice cracked slightly. I watched human parents stand beside military installations holding their children, daring us to fire, and when we couldn't, their soldiers would emerge from those positions to attack our forces. He manipulated the display again, showing communication intercepts. We thought they were being coerced, forced into these positions by their military leaders. Then we decoded their internal communications and learned the truth. The holographic text appeared in Federation standard script, translated from human languages. Every civilian position was voluntary. Human families were requesting to be placed in the most dangerous locations. Parents were competing for the chance to shield their military installations with their own lives. The cantina had grown cold around them. Even veteran soldiers who had seen dozens of conflicts looked sick at this revelation. This violated every principle of warfare we understood, Zefkol continued. Combatants and civilians are supposed to be distinct categories. Humans had eliminated that distinction entirely. Every human was a potential soldier. Every soldier was someone's family member. He closed his 4 eyes, as if trying to block out the memories. I was present when Admiral Krekek received authorization to treat human civilian positions as legitimate military targets. The political debate in the Federation Council lasted weeks. We had never faced an enemy that weaponized their own families. The journalist sat back in horror. You attacked civilian targets? We tried, Zefkol said quietly. And that's when we learned about human weapons we couldn't have imagined. They called them psychological warfare tactics. The display shifted to show intercepted human communications. They had been monitoring our internal channels from the beginning. Humans had somehow learned to decode our military communications and were broadcasting their responses on our own frequencies. Zefkol's voice became barely audible. They weren't just talking to our leadership, they were talking to us. Individual soldiers using our personal identification codes, addressing us by name and rank. The journalist felt a chill run through her. What were they saying? Everything, Zefkol whispered. They had studied our personnel files, our psychological profiles, our family histories. They knew about our mates, our offspring, our fears and hopes, and they used all of it against us. The display showed communication logs filled with personal information. Human voices would come over our comm systems during battle, speaking in our own languages, telling us about our families back home. They would describe our children's names, our mates' professions, our parents' health conditions. Zefkol's exoskeleton shuddered. But they weren't threatening our families. That would have been simple to counter. Instead, they were telling us stories. Human stories. About their own families, their own children, their own parents. He activated another section of the display. They would broadcast personal messages from human families to their soldiers in the field, making sure we could hear them. Messages of love, of support, of pride in their sacrifice. They were showing us that they were fighting not out of hatred, but out of love. The journalist struggled to understand. How is that psychological warfare? Because it made us realize what we were fighting, Zefkol explained. We thought we were conquering a primitive species, bringing order to chaos. Instead, we were trying to destroy a civilization of beings who loved each other so much they were willing to die for that love. He stood up again, pacing in the small space beside their table. Human soldiers would sing to each other during battle, not war songs, not martial hymns, but lullabies they sang to their children. They would share photographs of their families before suicide missions. They would send personal messages to their enemies, forgiving them for the war. The cantina had emptied around them. Only the journalist and a few other veterans remained, all transfixed by Zefkol's testimony. The worst part was their forgiveness, Zefkol said, his voice breaking. When they captured our soldiers, they didn't torture or execute them. They treated their wounds, shared their food, showed them pictures of human families. They turned our own prisoners against us. The display showed reports from repatriated prisoners. Captured Federation troops returned with stories of human kindness, human generosity, human honor. They spoke of enemies who had risked their own lives to save wounded prisoners, who had shared their limited medical supplies with captives. Zefkol sat back down heavily. How do you fight an enemy that treats your soldiers better than your own command does? How do you maintain hatred against beings who show more compassion than your own species? The journalist looked at the data crystal, its holographic displays still showing the evidence of human tactical genius and moral complexity. What happened next? Zefkol's 4 eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. We learned what humans meant when they said they were fighting for survival. And we learned why that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The holographic displays flickered as Zefkol's scarred hands trembled slightly over the data crystal. The journalist noticed his distress but remained silent, knowing they had reached the core of his story. The war changed when humans stopped defending, Zefkol said, his voice barely above a whisper. After 18 months of siege warfare, something shifted in their strategy. Our intelligence reports called it Phase 2, but we didn't understand what that meant until it was too late. He activated a new section of the holographic archive, showing star maps with human fleet movements. Humans had been building ships, not in the orbital shipyards we had destroyed, but in hidden facilities throughout their outer system. Asteroid mining stations, deep space construction platforms, even hollowed-out moons, all secretly converted to military production. The journalist studied the display, noting the scale of the operations. How many ships? We never got an accurate count, Zeph Cole admitted. Our estimates ranged from 10,000 to 50,000 vessels, but numbers weren't what made them dangerous. It was their design philosophy. The display zoomed in on detailed ship schematics. Human vessels had no shields, minimal armor, basic weapon systems. By our standards, they were barely functional, but they had something we had never encountered before: complete redundancy. He highlighted various ship systems. Every critical component had multiple backups. Life support, propulsion, weapons, navigation. Everything could be damaged or destroyed without disabling the vessel. Humans had designed their ships to keep fighting even when they should have been dead in space. Zeph Cole's forearms moved independently, manipulating different aspects of the display. But the ships themselves weren't the real weapon. The real weapon was the humans piloting them. New images appeared, showing psychological profiles and training records. Human military doctrine had evolved during our siege. They had developed something they called acceptable losses calculations. For every Federation ship they destroyed, they were willing to sacrifice 10 of their own vessels. The journalist felt her stomach turn. 10 to 1. Sometimes more, Zeph Cole confirmed. Humans had run computer simulations and determined that even with their technological disadvantage, they could win through sheer attrition. They had more population than we had expected, more manufacturing capability, and something we couldn't quantify: unlimited willingness to die. He paused the display on a communication intercept. This is a message from a human fleet commander to his subordinates before engaging our 5th battle group. Would you like me to translate it? At the journalist's nod, Zeph Cole activated the audio file. A human voice spoke in their harsh, melodic language, while Federation's standard text appeared beneath. Today we die so tomorrow our children might live. Show them what humans are capable of when we have nothing left to lose. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. That battle lasted 4 hours, Zeph Cole continued. When it was over, we had destroyed 47 human ships. We lost 6 vessels, including a dreadnought. By any military standard, it was a decisive Federation victory. His mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or despair. But the humans weren't trying to win battles. They were trying to teach us something. Every engagement was a lesson in human capabilities, human determination, human cost. The display showed tactical analyses of dozens of battles. Human losses were always catastrophic, but their performance improved with every engagement. They were learning our weaknesses faster than we could adapt our strengths. Zeph Cole activated another section of the archive. This is when we realized humans weren't fighting a war of conquest or territory. They were fighting a war of education. The new images showed human deep space probes spreading throughout Federation territory. While we were focused on their military resistance, humans had been launching exploration vessels, not warships, scientific survey craft with minimal armament and maximum sensor capability. The journalist leaned forward. They were spying on you? They were learning about us, Zeph Cole corrected. Every Federation world, every species, every military installation, humans were cataloging everything. They were preparing for a different kind of war. The display showed the scope of human intelligence gathering. Thousands of probe missions, millions of hours of surveillance data, detailed analyses of Federation society, technology, and psychology. Then came the day that changed everything, Zeph Cole said, his voice dropping to an almost inaudible level. Admiral Krekek received a communication from Earth. Not a military transmission, a civilian broadcast. The hologram showed a simple communication interface. It was an old human female, ancient by their standards, but speaking with complete authority. She identified herself as the grandmother of one of the human soldiers who had died in the Kepler 442 battle. Zefkol's 4 eyes closed as he recited from memory. She said, "We know who you are. We know where you come from. We know about your families, and we want you to know that we forgive you." The journalist felt a chill run through her. Forgive them? The message continued for 3 hours, Zefkol said. This human female, alone, unprotected, broadcasting from the ruins of her bombed city, proceeded to demonstrate complete knowledge of Federation command structure, military capabilities, and strategic planning. The display showed intelligence assessments that made the journalist's blood run cold. She knew Admiral Krekek's personal history, his family composition, his psychological profile. She knew the names of his offspring, his mate's profession, his own military service record from 40 years before the human contact. Zefkol's exoskeleton rattled as he shuddered. But she wasn't threatening him. She was talking to him like a concerned parent. She told him about human families who had lost children in the war. She shared stories of human grandmothers who would never see their grandchildren grow up. The journalist struggled to understand. Why? Because humans had realized something about us that we hadn't realized about ourselves, Zefkol explained. We weren't conquerors. We were parents, children, mates, friends, just like them. And they were showing us that this war was hurting both sides in ways that couldn't be measured in ships destroyed or territory conquered. He activated the final section of his archive. The human grandmother's message ended with a proposal. Not surrender, not negotiation, an invitation. She invited Admiral Krekek to come to Earth, alone and unarmed, to see what humans were really fighting for. The display showed communication logs of the Federation Command's response. The debate lasted weeks. Some generals called it an obvious trap. Others argued it was an unprecedented opportunity for intelligence gathering. Admiral Krekek made the decision himself. Zefkol's voice became distant, as if he were watching events from far away. I was part of his security detail when he agreed to the human invitation. We expected elaborate security measures, military escorts, formal diplomatic protocols. Instead, the hologram showed a simple transport landing on Earth's surface. One human was waiting for us, the same elderly female who had sent the message. She was alone, carrying nothing but a small bag of personal items. The journalist listened in fascination as Zefkol continued. She took Admiral Krekek on what she called a tour, not of military installations or government facilities, but of human neighborhoods, human schools, human hospitals, human families. The display showed images captured during this unprecedented visit. For 3 days, Admiral Krekek observed human society at its most basic level, children playing in streets that had been bombed months earlier, families sharing meals while discussing relatives who had died in the war, communities working together to rebuild destroyed infrastructure. Zefkol's 4 arms moved in complex patterns, expressing emotions his species had no words for. The human grandmother showed Admiral Krekek something we had never seen before, a species that could wage total war while maintaining complete compassion. He highlighted specific images from the archive. Human children playing games that simulated space battles, then stopping their play to help injured animals. Human soldiers on leave who spent their time caring for orphans and elderly civilians. Human scientists working simultaneously on weapons development and medical research to treat enemy prisoners. The journalist felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what she was hearing. How is that possible? Because humans don't separate their identity between warrior and caregiver, Zefkol explained. Every human soldier is also a parent, child, teacher, healer. They don't stop being human when they go to war. They become more human. The display showed the aftermath of Admiral Krekek's visit. When he returned to the fleet, Admiral Krekek was a changed being. He understood something that transformed our entire approach to the conflict. Zefkol's voice carried a note of wonder that had been absent throughout his entire story. Humans weren't fighting to defeat the Federation. They were fighting to save it. The journalist stared at him in confusion. Save it? The human grandmother had shown Admiral Krekek what they had learned from studying our society, Zefkol explained. The Federation was dying, not from external threats, but from internal stagnation. We had become so efficient at conquest that we had forgotten how to grow. The holographic displays showed comparative analyses of Federation and human society. Humans had identified patterns in our expansion that we hadn't recognized ourselves. Every species we conquered became less creative, less innovative, less alive. We weren't building an empire. We were creating a slowly spreading death. Zefkol stood up one final time, his movements now showing exhaustion rather than agitation. Humans were offering us something we had never encountered before, the chance to be defeated and emerge stronger because of it. He deactivated the data crystal, and the holograms faded away. The war ended not with surrender or conquest, but with what humans called integration. They taught us their greatest weapon, the ability to change, to adapt, to become something better than what we were before. The journalist sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. The Federation today, the council structure, the species equality protocols, the innovation initiatives, all human concepts, Zefkol confirmed. They didn't just defeat us militarily. They defeated our entire philosophy of existence and replaced it with something that made us stronger. He gathered his personal effects, preparing to leave. That's why humans are feared throughout the galaxy. Not because they're great warriors, though they are. Not because they're technological innovators, though they are that too. Humans are feared because they have the ability to look at any system, any civilization, any way of life, and imagine something better. The cantina had grown completely silent. Even the service staff had stopped pretending to work, listening to every word. Today, the Federation is stronger than it has ever been, Zefkol continued. Species that were stagnating under our old system are flourishing. Technologies that had plateaued for centuries are advancing rapidly. Art, science, philosophy, everything is growing in ways we never thought possible. He paused at the edge of their table. And all of it is because humans showed us what we could become if we were willing to change. The journalist looked up at him. What happened to you after the war? Zefkol's mandibles clicked in what she had learned to recognize as a smile. I became what humans call a teacher. I help other species understand human integration concepts. It's the most difficult and rewarding work I've ever done. He began to walk away, then turned back. If you really want to understand humans, study not what they destroy, but what they build after the destruction is over. That's their true strength, the ability to create something better from the ashes of what came before. As Zefkol disappeared into the night, the journalist sat alone with her recording, trying to process what she had learned. The human wars weren't a story of conquest or defeat. They were a story of transformation, of a species so powerful they could remake reality itself by simply refusing to accept that things had to remain as they were. Outside the cantina, the lights of the Federation's greatest space station reflected a civilization that had been forever changed by contact with beings who dared to imagine something better. And in that light, the journalist began to understand why humans were both the most feared and most respected species in the galaxy. They weren't just survivors. They were evolution in action, constantly becoming something greater than what they had been before, and inspiring everyone around them to do the same.